Hello, Rebels. Welcome to California Rebel Base. Today's episode is a special episode, State of the State, because we've got a lot to talk about. Unfortunately, Steve Hilton can't join us today. He had a bunch of technical difficulties, and it's extraordinarily disappointing because we've got a lot to discuss about what happened in the recall. We need your guys' support. We've got a state to save, and that means all of us got to come together. We got to get informed and we got to get involved. So subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends. And so without further ado, let me first introduce a fellow rebel, Alicia Krause.
Hey.
Hi, Alicia. Hi. We're happy to have you.
Oh, thanks. It's so good to be here. It's like we have to gather, surreptitiously throughout the state, but soon publicly.
That's exactly right. And you know what? We need to get more women voting conservative because we've got the men coming out, but for some reason, female conservatives are, shy and they're quiet and they're a little scared. So I think we're going to give them some hope.
Oh, girl, this is my new mantra. It's like you are eavesdropping on my brain and my conversations because this happens a lot. I get so many DMs and text messages and emails from women, a lot of whom don't even consider themselves aligning the right side of the aisle, just maybe more libertarian or classical liberals, right? That are registered Democrats, might have voted for Biden, but as business owners, as mothers, as people that are residents of this state, they're looking around going, what the heck is happening and what can I do about it? And I think that women are definitely an underrepresented minority by all parties, by the way, especially the two big main ones. But that can be another topic.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we're going to get into it. So let me first introduce Jennifer Fanlar. She's the managing editor of Red State. Welcome, Jennifer. We got another kick-ass woman to talk to, so thank you.
Thank you. I don't know about these shy conservative women because I certainly don't know any, but I'm sure they're out there and we need to find them and bring them along with us.
Yeah.
It's people I think that are, and understandably so, everybody's cost benefit analysis is going to be different, but it's people in fashion, it's people in Hollywood, it's people in business that maybe don't have the opportunity or are afraid or have experienced ramifications of cancel culture. If they spoke out. I think that you and I, Jennifer, and even Kristen are at levels of our career, have chosen career paths that this is kind of what we do. But we'd be remiss to not acknowledge the untapped voices and untapped voters in the state that might think the way we do, but they just don't feel like they have anybody representing their interests.
That's exactly right. And I'll remind you, I'm in tech. It's very dangerous to be conservative in tech. And so, one of the reasons that I decided to speak up was because nobody else was. And you're absolutely right, Alicia. You get to a point in your life and your career where you say, all right, I can take some punches to the face. I don't mind. And I've got to be able to empower the next generation or people who don't feel like they can take risk to speak up and know that, California is a very open place. Whatever happened to that, right? We really want this to be a place that celebrates not just diversity of race, creed, color, religion, but also a diversity of political perspectives, right? And that's what the point of this podcast and all of us coming together. So, Jennifer, let me kind of turn to you for a second because you wrote this great piece that I retweeted, I thought very soberly and thoughtfully going through what you thought went wrong and why Gavin is not just staying, but sort of staying with such a big margin. It's a little bit of a dagger to the heart. So maybe walk us through, you had some, 5 main points, walk us through sort of your top couple points because I thought they were great.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely was disappointing to see so quickly the other night, Tuesday night, victory declared, and then Newsom's Cheshire Cat speech with his big grin, declaring such a huge victory. And we know, there's so many votes that aren't even counted yet. A lot of them the day of. We know those are going to be people who voted for the recall. And to a prior point you made, I noticed over the last year, women coming up to me at different conservative events saying, you do know when you speak, when you tweet, when you write something, when you're on an appearance, you're speaking for thousands of us who can't speak out, just like Elisha was saying, that they just don't feel in their careers that they can do that. And so I definitely feel a responsibility to speak for those women who can't in their career. But to the recall election, the first thing I thought was the major key to the failure of the recall was that the messaging didn't stay on Newsom's failures. It ended up being Newsom versus Elder. And if Elder hadn't gotten in, Newsom would have been trying to personalize it against whoever the front runner was. And we allowed that messaging to get away from what has Newsom done to the state, like the homelessness, the crime, the lack of school choice, kids being forced to be home for an entire year, and kids with special needs having no way to get the services that they needed. So many things that moms and the women we're talking about would be passionate about if we had reached them with the message instead of basically a battle between Elder and Newsom.
Alicia, what do you think about that? What do you think about the fact that they didn't focus enough on what Newsom's record was?
I think 1,000% that's what happened. I mean, I've been talking about this all week long, that it became trying to make Elder a mini Trump ended up working for them. And and obviously, like Jen was saying, like they went after him because he was the front runner. They would have gone after Kylie or Cox or anybody else had they been the front runner in the same light, because California Republicans are really different. You know, I'm from the Bible Belt. I'm a conservative Christian, and there's other Republicans here that agree with me on maybe 95% of things, but they're not Bible Belt Republicans, right? And so you have to campaign to the Republican voters in this state. And I'm just shocked at, like, where did the 7 million people that voted for Trump Pence go? I mean, we haven't tallied up all the votes yet, but there are a lot of sleepy voters out there. And why couldn't the recall effort get those people out there to vote? It's really disappointing. And I think it was a missed opportunity, but it does give me hope, because I think that at the beginning of the recall effort, it brought to light all of the failures of big government. And I don't think that this is done.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, I sort of have a different take on this Elder thing, and I'll probably have a different view in 2 days, because I still am gathering all my thoughts. But so there were, almost 7 million people who voted for Trump, as you said, Alicia, in California, which is stunning, right? Because the state is so incredibly blue. And then 2.5 million people voted for Larry Elder, right? Who was, very publicly campaigning as a very staunch conservative. So at first I was thinking, okay, wow, this whole he's another Trump, he's a black Trump, that's working. It's really sort of mobilizing people. And maybe that's why we lost. But the more I was reflecting on it last night, I was thinking, maybe the flip is true, right? Here they were, the GOP was trying to run a very moderate, sort of traditional California Republican, right? Which you had in Faulconer. He is very moderate. He was probably more likely to garner some Democrat votes, right? But what he didn't do, because we didn't see enough momentum from him, was he didn't galvanize the conservatives or the independents. And once Larry's, got into the race, man, the energy of the race changed dramatically. So maybe one takeaway is that, there is appetite for a conservative in California, as we see for all these votes for Trump, and that Larry backed away too much from being a conservative. I mean, he was so back on his heels, kind of whining about the press and so on, instead of just saying, damn straight, this is who I am, right? And they don't want to talk about what they don't want to talk about, which is that Gavin is the white supremacist. Like, look at this guy. This guy drips in white privilege, right? He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's funded by the Gettys. He has entirely white friends, right? This guy is as white privilege as you possibly get. And who's he knocking down? He's knocking down the black guy from, the South Side. Maybe he needed to lean into it more, and he could have gotten a little more, support from the independents, which is what he needed. So, that's one sort of thing I'm struggling with, of maybe we need to lean in more to being conservative. Don't know.
I think also, and Jen, you're the expert here that looks and writes about this stuff every single day. But I think that Republicans just need to get better and more savvy at running campaigns. I think that everyone's assumption, you can go back to George W. Bush, Romney, McCain, everybody kind of like, oh, the media was nice to me in the primary. And then, they get to the general and it's like a smack across the face. I think that Elder, Kylie, everybody else, you have to assume when you run into a campaign that the media is going to be against you, that the cards are going to be stacked against you, and prepare for that. So was that your perspective as well? That it just seemed like maybe Elder wasn't prepared, that he was not just up against the Newsom machine and the DNC machine and the Biden machine, but also the media machine?
I think there's a lot to that because he's used to being in sympathetic media when he does an appearance on Fox or OAN or Newsmax or whatever. Those are all people that want to agree with him. And we all know that the media here is not going to want to agree with him, even if they kind of like him when he's not running for office. And there's a little bit, I agree and disagree, Kristen, with the point about leaning into conservatism. I think two big missteps were when he talked about replacing Dianne Feinstein and with the abortion talk where he was saying that he would line item veto any state funding going to abortions. I heartily agree with that, but I don't think that's the message that needed to be said right then. Instead, I would lean into conservative things on public safety, on getting rid of homelessness, things that we can lean into, really conservative things where we can get those no party preference and even some Democrats. School choice is a great one to lean into conservative there and kind of leave the social issues off the table or the national political things off the table for now, because we want to focus on Newsom and then the conservative solutions to what Newsom did.
I think I couldn't agree with you more. I thought it was a misstep to say he was going to replace Feinstein. But I mean, I'm not even sure that that's allowed. I agreed with Kylie's point that is actually a decision for the voters. That would have been a way to sort of dissipate that fear mongering. And I do want to take a second on the abortion issue because it actually seriously pissed me off how much fear mongering went completely undiscussed, right? So so everybody who listens, we got to get the word out here on two things. One, California's Constitution, the Constitution of our state, has a right to privacy, which is unique. Not every state has that. So it's already embedded in the Constitution that there's a right of privacy around reproductive rights. Number one. Number two, we have the Reproductive Rights Act, which has been in place and so, devotedly defended for 20 years. To say that someone who's going to be in office for 1 year before we're at the 2022 election is going to decimate a woman's right to choose was such a dishonest campaign. And I never heard somebody intelligently saying, this is absolutely ludicrous hogwash. Don't fall for stupid. Okay. Don't let them just say something.
It also is insulting. It is insulting to women. And even though I'm a very pro-life woman, if I were a pro-choice woman, I would be insulted that they think I'm that stupid.
Exactly.
And I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are some female voters out there that really are, because they are unaware of that and the fear mongering that celebrities in the media and Democrats latch on to. Because I say this all the time, and Jen, I really want your perspective on this, so I won't rant too long. I say that the Democratic Party uses women as tokens, and the Republican Party doesn't even utilize us at all.
Well, that's totally true. And I think to your point about the women, how could a pro-choice woman think that Larry Elder could do this or any other Republican? And I've been trying to talk to people outside my bubble in the last few weeks, people that don't watch the media that I do, that aren't on Twitter to see every little thing that happens. And a lot of them didn't even know, just it's not an abortion thing, but they didn't know about the Biden checking his watch thing when the Afghanistan, or those soldiers that were killed in Afghanistan came into the U.S. They didn't even know about that, didn't know it happened because it was not on the news stations that they watch. So I can see where if that's the only media diet you have, that you could think that someone could come in and take us back to some dark ages. And not just that, they were saying that if Larry Elder or any Republican became governor, that people would just be dying in the streets of COVID. Those commercials were but you couldn't go anywhere without seeing them. That goes to one of the points in my article. $100 million spent between independent expenditures and Gavin Newsom. And that went to all those internet ads. To every time you turn on a Dodger game, you had every commercial break, one or two anti-recall commercials. And if that's all people saw, it's kind of hard to blame them.
It is kind of funny, though, that they're talking about people dying in the streets, when I think Kevin Kiley pointed out on one of our recent episodes, 1,000 homeless people a year are dying on the streets in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. How the heck, the fact that they were able to twist that narrative and blame it on a recall instead of the guys that are actually in office, like Newsom and Garcetti, is real master manipulation and campaign genius. And it's like, could we just shift those people to our side to help us in the future?
I know.
It's insane.
I know. Jennifer, what do you think about this whole it's rigged? You mentioned it in your article. So, it's rigged. We're going to lose anyway. This was all sort of a fool's errand. So one was kind of it's useless. And then the second point that got a little momentum was they're cheating. The cheat's in.
Right. And that's so frustrating because, I'm not saying that there was not fraud or cheating. I'm sure there was. It happens everywhere in every election, but it wasn't going to be enough to reverse millions of votes in another direction. So that definitely would happen. But I think that there was voter suppression going on among our side and a lot from people outside of California. Going to Twitter and on podcasts and stuff saying, well, the system's not going to ever let this go. He's Pelosi's nephew. It's never going to happen. And then people just get discouraged and stay home and they think their vote doesn't matter. So that was very unhelpful.
And I got to say, sorry, guys, Trump needs to shut it on the cheating thing. Mm-hmm. It's really so not helpful, right?
I know.
Nobody helped campaign for any conservative candidate. And I think Trump thought he was doing some favors by saying, they're cheating in California.
He's just doing it for his own ego. He's just doing it for his own ego.
But this issue is ridiculous. It's like it makes everybody seem like a weird conspiracy theorist. And then number two, it's like, okay, I don't want to talk too much about Trump, but let's say that the cheat was in, the fix was in, and these, audits come back that there was cheating and it was sufficient to change the result. So what? What are we going to do? Like, it doesn't, sure, we should look into it and figure out if there was fraud so that we can fix it in the next election. But
then he should write a big old fat check to people like Larry Elder, who went up against the Secretary of State when they said that he, didn't file the right things. And then he ended up being on the ballot. He should be writing a big old fat check to people like Kevin Kiley, who numerous times during the pandemic and this recall effort have gone to different levels of the judiciary system to be like, hey, you guys, we're going to challenge this. That's what he should be doing. It's kind of like with the Georgia special election stuff, how he was so concerned about manipulating the narrative there that unfortunately Republicans who were Trump supporters didn't go out and vote for the Republican guy that we needed in the Senate. It's where I really I'm a little annoyed. Jennifer, but you also, it's like you were just tweeting mine and Kristen's like innermost thoughts this week, and I love it. The other night, Mia, our producer, sent me this tweet. She's like, girl, did you see this? Because I was ranting about this on Fox about how I'm going to stay and fight. And I'm sick and tired of people in the conservative movement running away. And you said this same thing. You're like, things I don't want to hear tonight as the results come in. And one of them was like, leave, go to Texas. Go to Florida. And as we've seen with what the HHS is doing today of, not sending COVID medicines to red states, or, places in Nashville that are fully masking and now requiring student vaccine mandates. I have friends in Phoenix experiencing the same things at Christian schools there. To me, it seems as if there is no place to flee from and that these liberal agendas are going to chase us wherever we go. So tell us why that narrative of like, well, just leave, come to a red state annoys you.
Well, it annoys me, first of all, and I've been on this for probably a year and a half on Twitter because people have been telling me, just leave, just leave. And I have it as part of my bio at Red State now. Like, don't tell me to leave because it just ticks me off. First of all, because my family's been here almost 200 years on one side.
Wow.
I'm not leaving the state. My great-grandfather worked for William Randolph Hearst running his cattle in the Central Valley. We've been here forever. We're not going anywhere. And also, like you said, Kristen, everywhere is becoming somewhat like California. My oldest son is moving back to North Carolina this weekend where he was born. And really the only thing different is going to be his cost of living because all of these policies are making their way everywhere. And not everyone can move. I have friends that are in fashion, that are entertainment, or that have businesses, or farmers in the Central Valley. You expect them to pick up and go where? Buy farmland in Iowa? It just doesn't make sense. We have to stay here and fight. And I was heartened to see people Californians that were like, oh, maybe if this loses, I'm going to be out. Instead, on Tuesday night saying, screw this, I'm fighting. Like our friend Kira Davis, she's not always been where she would stay here. She said, I might need to leave this place. But after Tuesday night, she said, I'm all in. We're fighting for this thing.
Yeah. And one of the things is I really did give a lot of credit to the Recall founders and advocates because, it woke up people like me. I wasn't paying attention, right? I'm just building my new company. California has these things you don't like, but I really wasn't paying attention to the governor's record. And when I saw the momentum, obviously my kids couldn't go to school. I have a bunch of friends whose businesses got destroyed by these just disgusting lockdowns. You started to pay attention and you said, well, hold on a second. Where'd all that money go? We've been sending so much money to solve these issues, and we're stepping over, our brothers and sisters in the States still, homelessness exploding, it becoming even more unaffordable, the fires, I never want to get used to a state where we don't have water or power. This is sort of ludicrous. And so I do think there's a lot of hope to be found in the Recall effort of we're not alone. Number one, because I think they really want people to feel like they're isolated and they're kind of weird freaks in California. No, we're not. There's a lot of us who want a decent education. We want running water. We want power. We don't want homelessness, and we want affordable housing. These are not crazy things to want. So we're not alone, number one. Number two, we must band together to have our voices heard and to get people elected locally to get these things changed. Because Alicia's exactly right that no matter what state you go to, this will exist if people don't stand their ground and say, these are our values and this is what we want in our communities, right? So I just think everybody's got to stay and fight. So Jennifer, do you feel like people are getting persuaded or dissuaded from the fight after the recall results?
No, I just be the way that the Twitter algorithm shows me my replies, but the people that I'm seeing are heartened to fight and do this. And I talked to a couple of different people involved in the Republican Party here over the last day, or activists. And what we've all agreed on is we have to stop this silo mentality. There were three different organizations that were working for the recall to get out the vote and things, and they were siloed and they weren't partnering with the California GOP. They weren't reaching out to create kind of a comprehensive plan. Okay, this is our messaging. These are the people we're targeting, all of that. So obviously they can't coordinate with the candidates, but they could have coordinated amongst the groups to do that. And I think going forward, we have to bring Larry Elder and his supporters into the party as activists instead of today Ron Naring was tweeting just crappy things about Larry Elder, and he used to be the chairman of the party and he's a big Faulkner guy, and that's just completely unhelpful. And another assemblyman yesterday was basically shaming the grassroots, saying, see, you lost this for us. And I said back to him, okay, if you think the grassroots is that powerful that they tank the recall for you, then maybe you ought to find out why they don't trust you and fix it.
Yeah, that's the only way we're going to win. That? Alicia, why do conservatives do that? Conservatives turn on each other so viciously, and Democrats never do.
Yeah. And also Democrats, like going back to the Trump thing of how he could just write a big fat check if he really did believe in the recall effort. This is what Democrats do. You have major Democrats like the Gettys and the Pelosi's in-laws and everybody else, even the Hearst family. Sorry, Jennifer, to your great-great-grandpa.
Right. It's okay, a long time ago.
Gorgeous in the Central Valley, but they've ruined it. Who donate huge stashes of money to a cause and then step away and let the people work together and do it. I've lived in this state being a very open, on-air, conservative Republican for 9 years and have never once heard from the state GOP or the county GOP or grassroots activists. To me, I ain't special, but I would like to fire people up. I would like to help on the grassroots level. How come nobody has reached out to me? How come there is no communication that occurs? And I think that you're starting to see infighting in the Democratic Party, specifically with the far left, AOC kind of type, radical types and the more traditionals. And I'm sitting back and watching with an evil grin because I feel like we've been dealing with this infighting in the Republican Party for a really long time. And I think it's sad. I think it comes from a place of narcissism and short-sightedness, is that we look election to election, our guy to our guy, you must agree with 110% of what he says all the time, instead of looking at the generations from now and our state and our country that we want to save and affect. And listen, I didn't vote for him. I didn't like him, but I use this quote from Jerry Brown all the time because it's 1,000% true. As goes California, so goes the nation. And so if you care about the rest of the nation, then you need to start caring about California.
Interesting about you brought up Ron Naring, Jennifer, because I thought that was just a disgusting and dumb tweet. I mean, it was really, that's your takeaway today. Instead of being reflective and saying, hold on a second, Larry Elder came out of nowhere, right? I mean, they weren't pushing that guy at all. Yeah.
In 10 weeks.
And he garnered he had the 25% of the people who voted in the recall voted for Larry Elder. You can't ignore the force that was Larry Elder. So the Ron Narings of the world need to be taking a step back going, what happened? Okay. And then you're absolutely right, Jennifer. How do we bring them in? And instead, he's, flicked them, spit in their face today. And that's why people get so turned off and they don't want to be involved in politics. It's sort of crazy. I want to take a step back for a second for both of you on the vote count. So I think, it plays into this, the fixes in when it got called so quickly and people were looking at the state website and looking at the votes and saying, wait a minute. Why aren't the votes counted? Like, I'm looking at my ballot. It's not counted. What's going on? And even if you look today, the count still isn't in. And that didn't used to be how it was in the state, right? I mean, we were just as large 4 years ago, and we were able to count all of the votes on the night of the election, or close to. What's going on now that we're preparing people for these 30-day counts? And whoever wants to answer that, but because I don't know. What is it? Why?
I know that a lot of counties were doing centralized counting. So I live in Ventura County, and where you used to just take your ballot and put it into the machine after you finished, or you could bring your mail ballot and turn it in. Now everything was going back to Ventura to be counted. So they had everything through, I think, 2 days before Election Day was counted on Election Day by 9 o'clock or midnight. And then there wasn't another update until yesterday afternoon, and there were only a few hundred ballots different. So that is concerning me. I don't have the full answer, but I know they had until today, being Thursday, I think around noon, to tell the state how many ballots they have left to count. So we should have a better idea of how many.
It's so weird to me too, because I felt like they were using the pandemic as an excuse, where the voting process that my husband and I did in person in November of 2020 was like seamless and easy, the easiest, most rapid, efficient experience that we ever had at a polling place in November of 2020 during the pandemic in Los Angeles County. And we voted in person on Tuesday too. Pretty seamless, pretty easy. So I don't understand what shifted and what changed. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember on election night in November there being this massive delay. I also think in all states across the nation, it should be a rebuke on ourselves and our system that we don't count absentee ballots quicker and get those in, specifically because the majority of military men and women that are serving and willing to die for our country, kind of in my opinion, and I know this ain't very popular, those votes should be counted first and not 30 days after the fact.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, they're really, California has transformed voting, and to how California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. Everybody watch out, because I don't think we're going to come off this 100% mail-in ballot process, right? They used COVID as the excuse to do that. You're right, Alicia, there was no reason to do it now, right? I can go to the grocery store. I can go basically anywhere with a mask or not with a mask, right? I think even people in many counties would have proven their vaccine status to vote because they're so rabid about doing that. It could have been perfectly safe voting, but they did this mail-in process. And I think that's how the rest of the country is going to go. And it's pretty terrifying because I think people don't pay attention to the rules, right? So they just assume that there's going to be, this beautiful process where people signature verify and they have trust where they shouldn't. And they need to go do their research. Because, I have, just first of all, look at the rules. And then I know a lot of people who work in election centers. They want to count the vote, right? Which they should, right? But they're not looking at these signatures with any kind of critical eye at all. And the fact that you can replace your signature with initials, and the only way that an election official is able to reject a signature match is if it's obvious and multiple, like there have to be multiple errors. They have to be super obvious and they have to be substantial. That's a pretty high standard. And you've got a lot of retired people who are going like, looks close enough to me, right? It just looks like a signature. So we're not doing this, rigorous signature matching. I'm not saying that changes the results at all, but over time, it's going to change the seriousness with which we take that voting process. And it really, I think, will transform how the votes come in. But Jennifer, what's your take?
Well, I spoke with Mark Moiser about this issue because he had run for Secretary of State. He's an election law attorney about that print at home ballot issue. And just going through the whole, what are all of the safeguards put in place to make sure that somebody doesn't do this and turn in their mail ballot. And in talking about mail ballots, he said the places and times where he's been there to watch those mail ballots be counted, that just the presence of observers makes 10 times more ballots be submitted for question, like for just a second reviewer. And so I think that that's a big point for us, is that we need to be willing to take that time to be observers, especially I hope that they don't get a bill for all mail ballots going forward through. But now that Newsom's beat the recall, it's going to be difficult, I think, to stop something like that. So if that's the hand we're dealt, we all have to be ready to go spend time being observers, because when people are watching, they're going to be a lot more likely to be on their toes.
Yeah,
that's a great point.
There has to be forced transparency for forced accountability. Which is so funny that we're here now, because I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember when I thought that that's what liberals were saying that they represented, was transparency and honesty and tolerance of everyone and their worldviews. So Jennifer, Kevin Kiley, last time he was on, Larry Elder, I do appreciate Larry's social media comments of being like, no regrets. I'm staying, I'm fighting. Kevin Kiley has had some really great tweets and content lately being like how he's not discouraged, how he's encouraged by everything that he saw across the state. Are you encouraged, and what's currently encouraging you for the future of the conservative movement in California?
Well, it's encouraging me just that we got this recall on the ballot. I mean, if you look back at the beginning of the year, no one thought this was going to happen. Before it was the system won't let that happen. We forced them to spend $100 million. Think about that. Newsom has basically the same margin of victory now that he did in 2018, but he had to spend $100 million to defend himself to get it. And so I think if we look at it that way, it shows, okay, we've really shown them that, yeah, we're going to call you out if you do things to destroy the state. We're not going to just sit back and let it go. So that's
now we know what it costs to stay in office. There's a price on the seat, right? Because I do think people need to remember, newsflash, a Democrat won in a blue state. You can't get too depressed about what happened. All that needed to happen was the Democrats come out and vote. And of course they were going to win, right? Because, they so outnumber Republicans and independents. But, last question for both of you, Alicia first, so what now? What would you say to actually our listeners? We've got a lot of really devoted, dedicated, people in California who, aren't just Republicans, aren't just independents. There's a lot of Democrats who listen, who do want change in the state. So what's your message to them? And then Jennifer, I'm going to ask you the same question.
1,000%. If you feel called and pressed to do it, run for local office. Pay attention to what's happening at your local school board, your city council, your county supervisor races, even mayor or something in your area, or find and support a candidate with time, money, and social media aid and vote, whatever, fundraising, etc., in your local races. I really think that the pandemic and then this recall has proven to me that politics is local, and for too long the average voter just pays attention to the name and the race at the top of the ticket, which tends to be gubernatorial or presidential, and ignores all the trickle down. Do not ignore the trickle down. Get engaged. Great
advice. Jennifer.
I agree. Get engaged at the local level. Neighborhood council in LA does a lot. It has a lot of power. And find what your gift is. If you're good at putting together events, if you're good at communications, if you're good at whatever you're good at, take that gift to your local party and be of service there.
There you have it. No one's going to save us. We got to save ourselves. All right, we got to end it there. Thank you both so much. Jennifer Van Laar, managing editor of Red State. Follow her on Twitter. How do people follow you on Twitter, Jennifer?
At Jen Van Laar.
Perfect. And Alicia, you're a fellow rebel, but how do people follow you?
The same, at Alicia Krause.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both of you. That does it for us on California Rebel Base. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, you got to help us save the state. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, watch us on YouTube, give us a like, give us some comments. We got to do this together. We got to band together. And thank you very much, and we'll see you guys.